This man survived being shot down, captured, and escaped so many times that the Nazis put a bounty on his head, worth more than any other Allied pilot in history. Douglas Bader lost both of his legs in a flying accident before the war even started. When World War II began, the Royal Air Force didn't want him. They said a man with no legs couldn't fly a fighter plane, but Bader proved them wrong in the most aggressive way possible. He didn't just fly, he hunted. And what he did in the skis over Europe made him a legend to his own side and an absolute nightmare to the Germans. December 14, 1931. Bader was 21 years old and already one of the most skilled pilots in the RAF. He was cocky, fearless, and loved showing off. That day he was flying a Bristol Bulldog biplane near Reading, England. He decided to perform some low-flying aerobatics, the kind of stunts that were strictly forbidden. He came in low and fast, trying to pull off a roll just above the ground, but he misjudged it. The plane's wingtip clipped the earth at over 200 miles per hour. The aircraft cartwheeled across the field and broke apart. Bader was thrown from the wreckage. When the rescue team reached him, they found him barely alive. His legs were crushed beyond recognition. The doctors had no choice. They amputated his right leg above the knee. Then, days later, they took his left leg below the knee. Most people would have given up right there. The pain alone was enough to break anyone, but Bader wasn't most people. He spent months in the hospital, refusing to accept what happened. He didn't mourn his legs. He got angry, and that anger fueled him. The moment he was fitted with artificial legs, he started learning to walk again. It was brutal. The prosthetics were heavy, uncomfortable, and painful, but Bader pushed through. Within weeks, he was walking without crutches. Within months, he was driving a car. And then he did something that shocked everyone. He got back into a plane. The RAF didn't want him anymore. They said a pilot with artificial legs couldn't handle the physical demands of flying. They rejected his applications over and over, but Bader kept trying. He flew privately, proving he could still control an aircraft. He demonstrated that his disability didn't affect his skills, but it didn't matter. The RAF wouldn't budge. So Bader left the service and took a desk job with an oil company. He hated every second of it. Then in 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. Suddenly, the RAF needed every pilot they could get. Bader saw his chance and applied again. This time, they couldn't afford to say no. In November 1939, Douglas Bader was reinstated into the Royal Air Force. He was 29 years old and ready to prove that losing his legs hadn't slowed him down one bit. Bader was assigned to a fighter squadron and given a Spitfire. The other pilots didn't know what to think of him at first. A man with no legs flying one of the fastest planes in the world, it seemed impossible. But the moment Bader took off, all doubts disappeared. He flew like a man possessed. His artificial legs actually gave him an advantage in combat. During high-speed turns, pilots would often black out from the G-forces pulling blood away from their legs. But Bader didn't have that problem. The blood had nowhere to go. He could pull tighter turns and stay conscious longer than anyone else. His flying style was aggressive and relentless. He didn't wait for the enemy to come to him. He went looking for them, and when he found them, he attacked without hesitation. Other pilots flew with caution, trying to survive. Bader flew to kill. He believed the best defense was offense. Get close, hit hard, and don't stop until the enemy was down. It worked. His kill count started climbing fast. By the summer of 1940, the Battle of Britain was raging. German bombers were pounding England day and night, trying to break the country's will to fight. The RAF was outnumbered and exhausted. Bader thrived in the chaos. He led his squadron into battle after battle, always at the front, always pushing forward. He became known for his fearlessness. While other pilots would dive away when things got dangerous, Bader would dive in deeper. He developed his own tactics that went against standard RAF doctrine. The official strategy was to fly in tight formations and follow orders. Bader thought that was stupid. He argued that pilots needed freedom to attack when they saw an opportunity. He wanted his squadrons to fly in loose formations, covering more sky and giving each pilot room to maneuver. His superiors didn't like it, but they couldn't argue with results. Bader's squadrons were racking up more kills than anyone else. He also pushed for something called the big wing tactic. Instead of sending up small groups of fighters, Bader wanted to assemble massive formations of 3, 4, or 5 squadrons flying together. The idea was to hit the German bombers with overwhelming force all at once. It was controversial. Some commanders thought it took too long to assemble that many planes while the enemy was already overhead. But Bader insisted it was the right approach. He got his chance to prove it. In September 1940, Bader was given command of 3 squadrons, over 30 fighters. He led them into battle as a single massive unit. When the formation hit the German bombers, it was devastating. The Luftwaffe pilots had never seen that many British fighters attacking at once. They broke formation and scattered. Bader's big wing shot down dozens of enemy planes in a single engagement. It was one of the most successful operations of the entire Battle of Britain. Bader became a hero overnight. Newspapers wrote about the Legless pilot who was shooting down German planes by the dozen. The public loved him. He was proof that disability didn't mean weakness. He gave hope to thousands of wounded soldiers who thought their fighting days were over. But Bader didn't care about fame. He cared about killing Germans, and he was very good at it. By early 1941, Bader had over 20 confirmed kills. He was promoted to wing commander and given control of multiple squadrons. He was only 30 years old and already one of the most decorated pilots in the RAF, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted more action, more combat, more kills. The Battle of Britain was winding down. The Luftwaffe had stopped their daytime bombing raids. Things were getting quieter over England, so Bader did what he always did. He went looking for trouble. The RAF started flying offensive missions over occupied France. They called them fighter sweeps. The goal was to provoke the Luftwaffe into coming up and fighting. Bader volunteered for every single mission. He led his squadrons deep into enemy territory, hunting for German fighters. It was dangerous work. They were flying over hostile ground with no support. If they got shot down, they were dead or captured. But Bader didn't care. He wanted to take the fight to the enemy. He flew mission after mission, racking up more kills. His total climbed past 22 confirmed victories. He became one of the top aces in the RAF, but his luck was about to run out. On August 9, 1941, Bader led a fighter sweep over France. His squadrons engaged a large formation of German fighters near the coast. The dogfight was fierce. Planes were spinning and diving in every direction. Bader was in the middle of it all, hunting his next target. Then something went wrong. Accounts differ on exactly what happened. Some say he collided with another plane. Others say he was hit by enemy fire. Bader himself wasn't sure. All he knew was that suddenly his Spitfire was out of control. The tail section was damaged and the plane started spinning toward the ground. He tried to regain control, but it was hopeless. He had only one option. He had to bail out. Bader released his harness and tried to climb out of the cockpit, but his artificial leg got caught on something inside the plane. The aircraft was plummeting toward the earth and he was trapped. Most pilots would have panicked. Bader stayed calm. He twisted and pulled until the straps on his prosthetic leg broke. The leg stayed in the plane and Bader fell free. His parachute opened and he drifted down into occupied France. He was alive, but now he was behind enemy lines with only one leg. Bader landed in a field near the town of Saint-Omer. German soldiers were there within minutes. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. This British pilot had just jumped out of his plane and he was missing a leg. They searched the wreckage and found his artificial leg still stuck in the cockpit. The Germans were shocked. They'd heard rumors about a legless British pilot, but they thought it was propaganda. Now they had him in custody. Bader was taken to a German military hospital. The Luftwaffe officers treated him with respect. They knew who he was. Bader's reputation had reached the German side. They'd been fighting him in the skis for months. They admired his skill and courage, even though he was their enemy. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top fighter aces, even visited him in the hospital. The two pilots talked about flying and combat. Galland told Bader he was honored to meet him. But respect didn't mean freedom. Bader was a prisoner of war. The Germans offered to repair his damaged prosthetic leg. Bader told them he'd lost his spare leg when he bilayed out. That was a lie. He still had both legs. He just wanted an excuse. So he asked the Germans to allow the RAF to drop him a replacement leg. Surprisingly, they agreed. The RAF was informed that their top ace was alive and needed a new prosthetic. They saw an opportunity. They loaded a bomber with a new artificial leg for Bader, along with supplies for other prisoners. Then they flew a mission over France and dropped the package. But they also dropped bombs on a nearby German target while they were there. Bader found this hilarious. The Germans were less amused. Once Bader had his legs back, he immediately started planning his escape. The German officers knew this would happen. They dealt with Allied prisoners before, but Bader was different. He was more determined, more aggressive, more willing to take risks. Within days of arriving at the hospital, he tried to escape by climbing out a window. He was caught before he even left the building. The Germans moved him to a more secure location. But Bader didn't stop. At his next prison camp, he made friends with other Allied prisoners. They formed an escape committee and started planning. They dug tunnels, forged documents, and gathered civilian clothes. Bader was involved in every scheme. His attitude frustrated the German guards. Most prisoners just wanted to survive the war. Bader wanted to get back to England so he could keep fighting. His behavior became such a problem that the Germans threatened to take away his artificial legs. They figured if he couldn't walk, he couldn't escape. Bader told them to go ahead and try. He said he'd crawl across France if he had to. The Germans realized they were dealing with someone who would never give up, so they sent him to Colditz Castle, a maximum security prison camp for the most difficult prisoners. Colditz was supposed to be escape-proof. It was a medieval castle on top of a hill, surrounded by guards and barbed wire. The Germans sent their most troublesome prisoners there because it was nearly impossible to break out. Bader arrived in August 1942 and immediately started looking for weaknesses. He spent 3 years at Colditz, participating in multiple escape attempts. None of them succeeded, but he never stopped trying. The other prisoners loved him. He kept their spirits up with his refusal to accept defeat. He organized sports competitions, theatrical performances, and educational classes, but he also kept planning escapes. He was involved in at least a dozen different schemes during his time at Colditz. The Germans kept close watch on him because they knew he was always plotting something. Bader became legendary among the prisoners. There were men at Colditz who had been shot down, wounded, and captured. They were broken and depressed. Then they'd meet Bader, a man with no legs who refused to sit still, and it changed their perspective. If he could keep fighting, so could they. Bader became a symbol of resistance. The Germans hated him for it. They'd captured one of Britain's top fighter aces and turned him into a hero among prisoners. Throughout his captivity, the Luftwaffe continued to treat Bader with respect. German fighter pilots would sometimes visit the camp just to meet him. They'd bring him food, cigarettes, and news from the outside world. They'd talk about aerial combat and share stories. It was a strange relationship. These men had been trying to kill each other in the sky, but on the ground, they shared mutual respect as warriors. Adolf Galland visited Bader multiple times during his imprisonment. The two became something close to friends, despite being on opposite sides of the war. Galland even invited Bader to sit in a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the main German fighter plane. Bader was thrilled. He examined the aircraft carefully, memorizing every detail. He knew that if he ever escaped, that information could be valuable to British intelligence. The Germans eventually realized that Bader was never going to stop causing trouble. They considered sending him to even more secure facilities, but there wasn't anywhere more secure than Colditz. So they just kept him under constant watch and tried to prevent his escape attempts before they could develop. But Bader was patient. He knew the war wouldn't last forever. He just had to survive long enough for the Allies to win. In April 1945, American forces liberated Colditz Castle. After 3 years and 8 months of imprisonment, Douglas Bader was finally free. He'd spent that entire time trying to escape, never giving up, never accepting his situation. The moment the American tanks rolled up to the castle gates, Bader walked out on his artificial legs and demanded to be sent back to England immediately. The Americans couldn't believe he was real. This cheerful, energetic man with no legs had just spent years in a maximum security prison and seemed completely unbothered by it. Bader returned to England as a hero. The public had followed his story throughout the war. They knew about his crashes, his kills, his capture, and his escape attempts. He represented everything the British wanted to believe about themselves during the war: courage, defiance, and an absolute refusal to quit. Bader was promoted, decorated, and celebrated, but the war in Europe was over. There was nothing left for him to fight. He remained in the RAF for a few more years before retiring in 1946. He'd flown hundreds of combat missions, shot down at least 22 enemy aircraft, survived being shot down himself, and spent years as a prisoner, all with no legs. After the war, he worked in the oil industry and became an advocate for people with disabilities. He gave speeches, wrote books, and showed the world that losing your legs didn't mean losing your life. But Bader never lost his edge. He remained outspoken, aggressive, and convinced he was right about everything. He criticized the RAF's tactics, argued with his former commanders, and never apologized for his behavior. Some people found him arrogant and difficult. Others admired his confidence and determination. Nobody could deny what he'd accomplished. The Luftwaffe pilots who fought against him never forgot Douglas Bader. After the war, many German aces spoke about him with respect and admiration. Adolf Galland remained friends with Bader until Galland's death in 1996. They appeared at air shows together, gave joint interviews, and talked about their experiences. Two enemies who tried to kill each other became living proof that respect could exist even in war. Bader's artificial legs are now on display at the Royal Air Force Museum in London. Next to them is his flight suit, his medals, and his logbook documenting every mission he flew. Thousands of people visit the museum every year to see the equipment used by the legless pilot who wouldn't quit. His story has been told in books, documentaries, and films. He became one of the most famous fighter pilots in history, not just for what he did in the air, but for how he refused to let anything stop him. The Germans put a bounty on Bader's head during the war. They offered money to any Luftwaffe pilot who could shoot him down. It was higher than the bounty for any other Allied pilot. That bounty was recognition of how much damage Bader had done to their forces. He wasn't just another enemy fighter pilot. He was a persistent, aggressive, nearly unstoppable threat who kept coming back no matter what they did to him. What makes Bader's story remarkable isn't just that he flew without legs. Plenty of pilots have overcome disabilities to fly aircraft. What makes him unique is that he didn't just fly, he dominated. He led squadrons into battle. He developed new tactics. He shot down dozens of enemy planes. He escaped from hospitals. He caused chaos in prison camps. He never stopped fighting, never stopped pushing, never accepted limitations. His personality was complex. He was brave but also reckless. He was confident but also arrogant. He inspired people but also annoyed them. He was a hero who didn't always act heroic. He was a leader who didn't always follow the rules. He was a legend who was also just a difficult man who refused to quit. But that refusal to quit is what made him extraordinary. Bader died in 1982 at the age of 72. He'd lived nearly 51 years after losing his legs. He'd flown fighters, survived crashes, fought in the biggest air battle in history, been captured, tried to escape repeatedly, and then spent decades advocating for disabled people. He proved that losing part of your body didn't mean losing your ability to live fully. He showed that disability could be overcome with determination and aggression. The Royal Air Force still tells stories about Douglas Bader to new pilots. He's part of their history, their tradition, their identity. The man who wouldn't let missing legs stop him from becoming one of the deadliest fighter pilots of World War II. The prisoner who drove his captors crazy with constant escape attempts. The hero who never acted like a victim. His artificial legs gave him an advantage in combat that other pilots didn't have. The G-forces that would black out normal pilots didn't affect him the same way. He could turn tighter, pull harder, and stay conscious when others couldn't. What seemed like a disability became a strength. What the RAF thought disqualified him from flying actually made him better at it. The crash that should have ended his career instead led to his greatest achievements. But the legs weren't the real advantage. The real advantage was his mindset. Bader refused to accept limits. He refused to believe he couldn't do something. When doctors said he'd never walk again, he walked. When the RAF said he couldn't fly, he flew. When the Germans captured him, he tried to escape. When they locked him in a maximum security prison, he kept trying. Nothing stopped him because he wouldn't let anything stop him. That's what made Douglas Bader the craziest pilot in World War II, not because he did wild stunts or took insane risks, but because he faced obstacles that would have defeated anyone else and simply refused to be defeated. He lost his legs and decided it didn't matter. He got shot down and decided he'd escape. He spent years in prison and decided he'd keep fighting anyway. Every time something should have stopped him, he just kept going. There are countless stories of brave pilots from World War II, men who flew dangerous missions, shot down enemy planes, and survived incredible circumstances. But Douglas Bader's story stands out because his war started before he even reached the battlefield. His first fight was with his own body, then with his own service who didn't want him, then with the enemy in the sky, then with his captors on the ground. He won some and lost some, but he never stopped fighting. The Nazis thought capturing Bader would be a victory. They'd taken one of Britain's top aces out of the war, but Bader turned his captivity into another battlefield. He made the Germans dedicate resources to watching him, guarding him, and preventing his escapes. He inspired other prisoners to resist. He became a propaganda problem for Germany and a symbol of British defiance. Even in prison, he was still fighting the war. When American forces liberated Colditz, they found hundreds of Allied prisoners who'd been locked up for years. Most of them were exhausted, defeated, and just grateful to be alive. Then there was Bader, cheerful and energetic, complaining that the Americans had taken too long and asking when he could get back to England so he could fly more missions. The war was almost over, but Bader was ready to keep fighting. That was who he was. Subscribe if you want more insane World War II stories like this.